He was a Wall Street titan. A kingmaker who could move markets with a whisper. She was his beautiful, pregnant wife. The perfect ornament to his gilded life. But when billionaire Julian Croft woke up one morning and decided to freeze his wife's bank accounts, leaving her penniless and trapped in their Fifth Avenue penthouse, he made a fatal mistake. He thought he was caging a songbird. But he had actually cornered a lioness. What he didn't know was that Ilara's old money family hadn't just given her a dowry. They had given her a weapon. This is the story of how a woman with nothing but a secret phone call and a long-forgotten trust fund systematically dismantled a financial empire to save herself and her unborn child. The air in the penthouse was always the same, a sterile, climate-controlled 72 degrees. Tinged with the faint, expensive scent of white tea and lilies that Julian Croft insisted upon. From their perch on the 80th floor overlooking Central Park, New York City was a silent, glittering tapestry. For Ilara Croft, it was the most beautiful prison in the world. To an outsider, her life was a fantasy. At 28, she was married to Julian Croft, the 40-year-old enfant terrible of Wall Street. His firm, Croft Consolidated, was a leviathan, swallowing smaller companies with a rapaciousness that the Financial Times called both terrifying and brilliant. Their life was a curated series of triumphs, galas at the Met, summers in their sprawling Hamptons estate, and impulsive trips to Milan for a weekend of shopping. Julian draped her in Graff diamonds and Hermès crocodile. Not as gifts, but as branding. She was the Ilara Croft, the flawless accessory to his monumental success. This morning, however, a secret joy warmed her. A feeling entirely her own. She sat on the edge of their vast, custom-made bed, the silk sheets pooling around her ankles. In her hand was a positive pregnancy test. 2 stark blue lines. A baby. Their baby. 4 months. She had felt a creeping hollowness. A sense of being an exquisite ghost in her own life. But this was real. This was substance. She waited for Julian to finish his morning routine, a brutal session with his personal trainer. A cold plunge. And then 30 minutes of uninterrupted market analysis on a bank of 8 monitors in his home office. He emerged precisely at 7:30 a.m. Knotting a silk tie from Charvet. He was handsome in a severe, sculpted way. His dark hair tinged with a distinguished gray at the temples. He didn't smile. He approved. "You're glowing," he stated, his eyes scanning her as if assessing a stock price. It wasn't a compliment. It was an observation of an asset's condition. "Julian, I have something to tell you," Ilara said, her voice trembling slightly. She held out the test. He took it. His expression unreadable. He stared at the 2 blue lines for a long moment. Ilara's heart hammered against her ribs. She had pictured this moment 1,000 times, tears. A tender embrace. Whispers of excitement. Julian's gaze lifted from the test and met hers. A strange, proprietary light flickered in his eyes. "All right," he said, his tone the same as when he closed a multi-billion-dollar merger. "We'll need to make adjustments. The trip to Aspen is cancelled. Your obstetrician will be Dr. Helen Chang at Mount Sinai. I'll have my assistant schedule a full workup. We'll convert the west wing of the Hamptons house into a nursery. I'll handle the designer." He hadn't said congratulations. He hadn't touched her. He had simply started issuing directives. The warmth inside her chilled. I was thinking. She began. Wanting to suggest her own childhood doctor. To talk about names. To share the moment. Ilara. He cut her off. His voice soft but edged with steel. I know what's best. We can't leave anything to chance now. This baby. It's a Croft. It's my legacy. Everything has to be perfect. He placed the test on the marble nightstand as if it were a finalized contract. Gave her a perfunctory kiss on the forehead. And left for the office. The scent of his Tom Ford cologne lingered. Suffocating her. The joy she had felt just minutes before curdled into a familiar dread. It wasn't their baby. It was his legacy. She was merely the vessel. The next 2 weeks were a blur of appointments Julian's office had scheduled, nutritionists. Wellness coaches. A consultation with Dr. Chang where Julian did most of the talking. Outlining the optimal prenatal strategy. He vetted and fired their chef for using non-organic kale. He installed a new air purification system. His control. Always a suffocating blanket. Was now a straitjacket. The breaking point came on a Tuesday. Ilara was having lunch with her 2 friends. The only 2 from her pre-Julian life she was still allowed to see. She'd insisted on a small, discreet restaurant in Soho. Away from the usual prying eyes of their social set. The bill came and, as she always did, she handed the waiter her black Amex card. Julian insisted she use it. It was, he said, unlimited. The waiter returned. His face a mask of embarrassment. I'm so sorry. Mrs. Croft. It's been declined. A flush of heat crept up Ilara's neck. That's impossible. Could you try it again? He did. Declined again. It says the account holder has suspended the card. Her friends exchanged awkward glances. The humiliation was a physical blow. She fumbled in her purse for another card. A Visa debit card linked to her personal savings account. A small fund she'd had since college. Declined. A frantic, cold sweat broke out on her skin. She excused herself to the restroom and tried to log into her mobile banking app. Access denied. Please contact your primary account holder. The primary account holder was Julian. He had frozen everything. Every cent. He had cut her off completely. Without a word of warning. She stumbled back to the table. Her face pale. One of her friends quietly paid the bill. The pity in her eyes was almost worse than the shame. When she got back to the penthouse, the silence was deafening. She waited for hours. Julian returned late. Well after 11 p.m. He walked into the living room, loosening his tie. His face impassive. Julian, she said, her voice shaking with a mixture of rage and fear. My cards were declined today. He didn't feign surprise. He simply placed his briefcase on the coffee table. Yes. I had them suspended. You. What? Why? Without even telling me. You're pregnant now, he said. His tone infuriatingly calm. As if explaining a simple concept to a child. Your health. And the health of my heir. Are my top priority. That means no more frivolous lunches. No more unauthorized trips. No more stress. From now on. Anything you need, food, clothing, transport, will be arranged by my staff. You just need to ask. It's for your own good. It's safer this way. She stared at him. The full, horrifying reality of her situation crashing down on her. He hadn't just frozen her accounts. He had formalized her status as his property. She was a prisoner. Her world had shrunk to the dimensions of this penthouse. Her every need subject to his approval. She was pregnant, vulnerable, and utterly, totally dependent on a man who saw her not as a wife, but as an incubator. You can't do this, she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. I already have, he replied, turning toward his office. It's all taken care of. As he walked away, a cold, hard fury began to replace her fear. He thought he had taken everything. He thought he had won. But Julian Croft, for all his market analysis and strategic genius, had made one colossal miscalculation. He knew all about Ilara Croft, his trophy wife. But he knew nothing about Ilara Vance, the granddaughter of Arthur Vance. A man who believed that true power is never seen until it is used. And in the back of a dusty safe in her childhood bedroom 1,000 miles away lay a set of documents her grandfather had given her years ago, a weapon forged in old money and secret clauses, waiting for this exact moment. The first 24 hours were a masterclass in psychological warfare. Julian's control was absolute and suffocatingly polite. A new chef, approved by his nutritionist, prepared meals that were bland, virtuous, and served at precise times. If Ilara wanted to leave the apartment, she had to give 12 hours notice so that a driver and a security guard ostensibly for her protection could be arranged. Every request was filtered through Julian's ever-present personal assistant, a brisk woman named Cynthia, whose loyalty was clearly to the man who signed her 6-figure paycheck. Ilara played the part he had assigned her. She was docile, defeated, and fragile. She stayed in bed late, picked at her food, and shed quiet tears where she knew the maids would see them. She let Julian believe he had broken her. Inside, however, the fear had crystallized into something cold, sharp, and diamond-hard: resolve. Her baby would not be born into this cage. Her child would not be raised as a pawn in Julian Croft's dynastic ambitions. On the third night, she waited until the rhythmic, deep breathing from Julian's side of the bed told her he was asleep. Slipping out from under the heavy duvet, she crept into her dressing room, a vast space larger than most New York apartments. She closed the heavy oak door, the click of the latch deafeningly loud in the silence. She didn't turn on the lights. Kneeling, she ran her hand along the back of the walk-in closet, behind a row of couture gowns she hadn't worn in years. Her fingers found the nearly invisible seam of a wall safe. Julian knew about this safe. He'd had it installed. It held the Graf diamond necklace he'd given her for their first anniversary and a few other ostentatious pieces. He knew the combination, their wedding date. He checked it periodically. But what he didn't know was that Ilara had paid the installer an extra $5,000 in cashback when she had billed a smaller, secondary biometric locked compartment inside the main safe. She pressed her thumb against a hidden sensor. A tiny section of the velvet-lined wall popped open with a faint hiss. Inside was not jewelry, but a single worn leather folio and a cheap burner phone she had bought for cash 2 years ago and never used. She took them out. Her hands trembling. She sat on the floor. The glow of the city filtering through the window. And opened the folio. The paper was thick. Creamy. And embossed with the letterhead of a discreet, centuries-old law firm in Geneva, Switzerland, Fontaine and Chen. Inside were the founding documents of something called the Odysseus Trust. The memory washed over her. Her 21st birthday. It wasn't a lavish party. It was a quiet dinner with her grandfather, Arthur Vance. Arthur was old money. Old industry. Old everything. His family had made their fortune in shipping and logistics long before income tax was a certainty. He was a quiet, formidable man with pale blue eyes that saw everything. While her parents were dazzled by Julian's new money flash, Arthur had always been reserved. His approval conspicuously absent. That night, he had slid the leather folio across the table. "This is for you, Ilara," he'd said. "Not from me, but for you. It is a provision. A trust fund?" She had asked naively. He'd given a rare, thin smile. "Of a sort. It is a silent partner. You will not touch it. You will not speak of it. You will, for all intents and purposes, forget it exists. The men who manage it at Fontaine and Chen are the sons of the men who worked for my father. Their loyalty is to the Vances, not to a balance sheet." She remembered flipping through the dense legalese. The trust had been seeded with a modest amount from his estate. But the portfolio was aggressive, global, and utterly opaque. She was the sole beneficiary. But it was one particular section. Article 3. Section 4b. That he had tapped with a long, bony finger. "Pay attention to this," he'd warned. His voice low. "This clause is your parachute, your sword, and your shield. It is triggered by a spousal act of financial coercion or bad faith. If any man husband specifically uses financial control to imprison you, this clause activates. The trust is no longer a passive investment vehicle. It becomes an active agent on your behalf. It will be your bank, your army, and your lawyer. But, Ilara," he had fixed her with his intense gaze, "you only pull this trigger once. It is not a warning shot. It is a declaration of war." At 21, blissfully single and idealistic, she had thought him eccentric. A relic of a bygone era of ruthless patriarchs and arranged marriages. Now, sitting on the cold floor of her dressing room, she realized her grandfather hadn't been eccentric. He had been prophetic. He had seen a potential for vulnerability in her that she had been blind to. And he had armed her for a battle she never knew she would have to fight. She powered on the burner phone. It took a moment to find a signal. Holding her breath, she dialed the international number for Fontaine and Chen listed on the letterhead. It was 4 a.m. In New York, but a respectable 10 a.m. in Geneva. The phone was answered on the second ring. Fontaine and Chen. A crisp female voice said in French, "I need to speak to Mr. Chen." Ilara said, her own voice a little rusty. "My name is Ilara Vance. My client identifier is Odysseus." There was a pause. The name was a key. A code. One moment. Please. A few seconds later. A man's voice, calm and measured, came on the line. This is Alistair Chen. To whom am I speaking? This is Ilara Vance. Ilara Croft. Now. There was another slight pause. The sound of keyboard clicks in the background. Ah. Ms. Vance. We have not had the pleasure. Your grandfather was a remarkable man. How may we be of service? His English was perfect. With a faint British accent from years at Cambridge. Ilara took a deep breath. The words catching in her throat. Mr. Chen. I need to invoke Article 3. Section 4B of the Odysseus Trust. The line went silent for a full 10 seconds. The only sound was the faint transatlantic hiss. Ilara's heart pounded. Had she said it right? Did he understand? Finally. Chen's voice returned. All traces of pleasantry gone. Replaced by a tone of immense gravity and immediate focus. Understood. Ms. Vance. The trigger event has occurred. Yes. My husband, Julian Croft, has seized all my financial assets. My bank accounts and credit lines are frozen. I am confined to my home under his direct control. I am pregnant and have no access to my own resources. More typing. Julian Croft of Croft Consolidated. We are aware of him. The portfolio has been monitoring his activities as a matter of course since your marriage. Ilara was stunned. They had been watching Julian all along. The terms of the trust are now in effect. Chen continued. His voice sharp and efficient. First. Your immediate liquidity. A courier will be dispatched to your location within 12 hours. You will be buzzed from the lobby under the name AV Deliveries. Be ready. The package will contain a debit card linked to a new, non-extraditable account in Liechtenstein. Seated with an initial €100. 000. It will also contain a secure satellite phone and a laptop. They are untraceable. Use them. And only them. For all future communication with me. He spoke with such speed and precision that Ilara could barely keep up. Second. He went on. The active measures. The trust will now allocate a significant portion of its capital to a new directive, the systematic deleveraging and dismantling of Julian Croft's financial holdings. We will need your help. You have intimate access. We need information passwords. Deal structures. Private ledgers. Vulnerabilities, anything that is not public knowledge. Your husband values control above all else. We will use that against him. We will not attack him like a rival firm. We will dissolve his foundations like water seeping into stone. Ilara felt a dizzying mix of terror and exhilaration. This was real. This was happening. How? How much is in the trust? She asked. Her voice barely a whisper. There was a dry chuckle on the other end of the line. Ms. Vance. Your grandfather was a very wise investor. And it has been 7 years. Let's just say that the trust's current valuation is substantial. Substantial enough that if Mr. Croft were to know its full extent, he would be the one feeling trapped. What do you need me to do? For now. Nothing. Continue to play the part of the broken wife. Be meek. Be docile. Let him underestimate you. That is your greatest advantage. Gather what information you can safely. Our team will begin its work immediately. We will be in touch via the secure phone. Do you understand? Yes, she said, her voice firm. A new strength flowing through her veins. I understand. Good. Welcome back. Ms. Vance. Chen said. Let's get you out of your cage. She ended the call and sat in the darkness, the leather folio in her lap. Julian thought he was the master of the universe, a predator at the top of the food chain. He had no idea that a ghost from the past, a promise made to a young woman by her grandfather, had just marked him as prey. The game had changed. And the Lara Croft, the prisoner, was now the architect of her husband's ruin. For the next 3 weeks, Ilara lived a double life with a discipline that would have impressed a covert operative. Outwardly, she was the picture of resigned melancholy. She allowed the nurse Julian had hired to take her blood pressure. She ate the prescribed meals of steamed fish and quinoa. She feigned interest in the swatches of fabric for the nursery that Julian's designer presented. She was a ghost in her own home, drifting through the opulent rooms, her expression vacant. Julian, consumed by his own ego and the demands of his empire, saw only what he wanted to see, a problem contained, a variable controlled. Inwardly, Ilara was a whirlwind of focused activity. The package from AV Deliveries had arrived as promised. The doorman, accustomed to a constant stream of deliveries from every luxury brand in existence, hadn't batted an eye. Inside a nondescript Chanel box, a perfect piece of camouflage, were the tools of her new life, the sleek, heavy satellite phone, the anonymous black laptop, and the cool metal debit card from a bank in Vaduz. Her clandestine headquarters was the ensuite bathroom of a guest bedroom that was seldom used. It had a solid core door and a noisy ventilation fan that provided excellent cover. Each night, after Julian was asleep, she would slip inside, turn on the fan and the shower for good measure, and boot up the secure laptop. Her first conversations with Alistair Chen were tutorials in corporate espionage. He was patient, precise, and utterly ruthless. Julian's entire empire is built on leverage and perception, Chen explained, his voice coming through the encrypted line with perfect clarity. He borrows heavily to finance acquisitions, using the inflated value of his current assets as collateral. The whole structure is a house of cards. If one key support is pulled, the entire thing will tremble. Our job is to find that support. Ilara's role was to provide the map. Years of being the silent wife at dinner parties, of half listening to Julian's arrogant monologues about his deals, had filled her head with a trove of information she never realized she possessed. He has a private server in his home office, she told Chen, picturing the sleek black tower humming behind a ventilated grate. He calls it the Citadel. He says it's more secure than the cloud. He backs everything up to it nightly. Does he have a password? He's too arrogant for a simple one. It's a sequence. He uses a small black fob that he keeps on his keychain. It generates a new alphanumeric code every 60 seconds. A two-factor authentication key. Difficult, but not impossible. We would need the fob itself, Chen mused. Ilara's mind raced. Julian's keys. They were always with him. Except for one time, when he swam. Every morning at 5:30 a.m. He swam laps in the building's private pool for exactly 30 minutes. He left his keys, his wallet, and his phone in a locker. The next morning, Ilara rose at 5:15. She put on her workout clothes and, for the first time in months, went down to the resident-only fitness center. Julian was already in the pool, a sleek machine cutting through the still water. She feigned a series of gentle, pregnancy-approved stretches. Her eyes locked on the men's locker room door. At 6:01 a.m. He emerged, his hair wet, a towel slung around his neck. He gave her a nod of approval like that she was being proactive about her health and disappeared back into the elevator. She waited a full minute, her heart hammering. Then she walked calmly into the men's locker room. It was empty. She found his locker. Number 8. His lucky number. It was secured with a simple combination lock. She smiled grimly. Julian believed complex problems required complex solutions. He would never imagine she knew the simple, sentimental code he'd chosen, the date of their first meeting. October 2nd, 14. The lock clicked open. There they were, his keys, his wallet. She unclipped the small black fob. Working quickly, she pressed it against a small gray device the size of a domino that Chen had sent her. It was a high-speed cloner. A tiny red light on the device blinked, then turned green. It had copied the fob's unique cryptographic signature. She clipped the original fob back onto the keychain, closed the locker, spun the tumblers, and walked out. The entire operation took less than 90 seconds. She was back in the apartment before Julian had even finished his protein shake. That night, she relayed the success to Chen. "Excellent. Ms. Vance," he said, his voice humming with satisfaction. "With this, our technicians can replicate the key's algorithm. We will have a window into the Citadel." Now, what is his current obsession? Something called the Helios Project. She replied instantly. Julian had been consumed by it for months. It's a massive hostile takeover of a clean energy company, Solara Innovations. He's been secretly accumulating their stock through a dozen shell corporations. He plans to announce the takeover in a month. He says it will be his masterpiece, the deal that makes him a legend. Hostile takeovers are bloody affairs, Chen noted. They require powerful allies. Who are his partners? Ilara closed her eyes, dredging her memory. He's financing it with a massive loan from a private consortium in Dubai, led by a Sheikh Al Thani. And his key Wall Street ally is a man named Marcus Thorne at Goldman Sachs. They handle the brokerage side. Marcus Thorne, Chen repeated slowly. We know him. A man with expensive tastes and a penchant for gambling on sporting events. A potential vulnerability. Over the next 2 weeks, the Odysseus Trust became a ghost in Julian's machine. Using the cloned key, Chen's team in Geneva slipped in and out of the Citadel server, silent and undetected. They were digital specters, copying files, mapping networks, and tracing the labyrinthine flow of money that propped up the Croft Empire. Ilara became the human intelligence. She paid close attention to Julian's moods. She knew when a particular shell company was facing a regulatory hurdle by the tension in his jaw. She knew when a wire transfer was imminent by the way he paced the living room, barking orders into his phone. She would feed these scraps of information a name, a date, a bangto Chen, who would weave them into a larger tapestry of financial intelligence. The trust began its attack not with a cannonball, but with 1,000 tiny cuts. An anonymous tip was sent to a German financial regulator about irregularities in a Frankfurt-based shell company, one of the key vehicles for the Solara stock acquisition. The company's assets were frozen pending an investigation, tying up hundreds of millions of Julian's capital. He was enraged, blaming German inefficiency, never suspecting the source. Next, a carefully curated dossier detailing Marcus Thorne's undeclared gambling debts was leaked to the compliance department at Goldman Sachs. Thorne was quietly and swiftly removed from his position, severing Julian's primary artery into the Wall Street trading floors. Julian was furious, cursing Thorne's stupidity and recklessness. Then, Chen's team, armed with the knowledge of Julian's private ledgers, began a coordinated and anonymous short-selling campaign against Croft Consolidated's publicly traded bonds. They knew exactly where the company was overleveraged, where the debt covenants were weakest. The bond yields began to spike, making it more expensive for Julian to borrow money. He saw it as market volatility, a reaction to rising interest rates, a sign of rival firms smelling blood. He never once looked at his own home. He grew more volatile, more paranoid. One evening, a priceless Ming vase he had bought at a Sotheby's auction was knocked over and shattered by a maid. Julian flew into an incandescent rage, firing her on the spot and screaming about incompetence. He was a king whose castle was being mysteriously undermined. And so he reinforced the walls, becoming even more of a tyrant to those within his immediate grasp. Ilara watched him, her face a mask of sympathy, her heart a block of ice. She would soothe him, bringing him a glass of water, murmuring placating words. He would grab her arm, his grip too tight, his eyes wild. "They're coming for me. All of them. The Russians. The Chinese. They want to tear down what I've built. But I won't let them." "Of course not. Darling," she would whisper. "You're too smart for them." That night, in the sterile silence of the guest bathroom, she logged on for her call with Chen. "He's feeling the pressure," she reported. "He's becoming unstable." "Good," Chen replied. "The foundations are saturated. The structure is weak. It's time to prepare for the final stroke. The Helios project is his pride. We will turn it into his guillotine." Ilara looked at her own reflection in the dark screen of the laptop. Her face was pale, her eyes large and shadowed. But there was a hardness in them that hadn't been there before. She was no longer just a victim. She was an instrument of justice. A quiet, patient force of destruction. Julian had tried to freeze her out, to render her powerless. Instead, he had unleashed a power he couldn't comprehend, a ghost forged by a grandfather's love and a husband's cruelty. The first visible tremor struck on a Monday morning. Julian was in his home office, a space he called the cockpit. He was on a conference call with his legal team, finalizing the last details before launching his hostile bid for Solara Innovations. He was arrogant, imperious, and completely in his element. Ilara was in the kitchen, ostensibly overseeing the preparation of her morning smoothie. But in reality, she was listening. The kitchen was directly below the office. And a discreet baby monitor intended for the nursery was currently tucked behind a potted orchid. Broadcasting the audio from Julian's office to a small receiver she kept in her pocket. It was a trick Chen's team had suggested. A low-tech solution to a high-tech problem. The financing from Dubai is secure, Julian was saying. His voice booming with confidence. Sheikh Al Thani's consortium is wiring the final tranche today. Once it lands, we file the 13D with the SEC and go public. Solara's board won't know what hit them. Suddenly, the triumphant tone vanished. What? What do you mean there's a delay? A pause. Elara held her breath. What compliance flag? It's a standard wire transfer. Get the bankers on the phone. Get Al Thani on the phone. I don't care what time it is in Dubai. You wake him up. The call ended abruptly. A heavy silence followed. Then the distinct, sharp sound of a crystal glass being smashed against a wall. Elara flinched but kept her expression serene as the chef glanced nervously in her direction. 2 hours later, Julian stormed out of his office. His face ashen. He bypassed her completely, not even registering her presence as he stalked towards the bedroom. Dialing his phone. Get me Mikhail Petrov's private number. He snarled at his assistant. Now. Elara knew what had happened. Chen had warned her this was coming. The Odysseus Trust, through another anonymous tip, had alerted the U.S. Treasury's Office of Foreign Assets Control, OFAC, to a potential violation in the Dubai transaction. The tip suggested, with impeccably forged evidence, that a small percentage of the consortium's funds could be traced back to a sanctioned Russian oligarch. A man named Mikhail Petrov, Julian's #1 rival. The wire transfer wasn't just delayed. It was frozen solid. Tangled in a web of international anti-money laundering regulations that would take months, if not years, to unravel. The fuel for the Helios project had been cut off at the source. Julian's paranoia, which had been simmering for weeks, now boiled over. He was convinced this was a direct attack from Petrov. He saw his rival's hand in everything, the German investigation, Marcus Thorne's downfall, the pressure on his bonds. It was a classic corporate raid. And he was blind to the true enemy. His ego simply couldn't conceive of an attack coming from anywhere but a competing titan. The idea that it could originate from the silent, pregnant woman padding around his apartment was beyond the realm of his imagination. His tyranny in the penthouse intensified. He had the entire apartment swept for listening devices. A team of ex-Mossad security consultants marching through their home. They found nothing. Of course. Elara's tools were too sophisticated. And the baby monitor was too innocuous. The failure to find a bug only made him more certain he was dealing with a genius adversary. He started locking the door to his office. He began taking important calls in his car, driving aimlessly through Manhattan for hours. His relationship with Elara became a twisted caricature of concern. He would question her constantly. Not about her well-being, but about her conversations. Did your mother call today? What did she say? Did you talk to your friends? Who were they? What did you talk about? He would demand, his eyes boring into her. He suspected everyone around him of being a potential leak. Elara played her part to perfection. She seemed frightened by his outbursts, confused by his questions. She cried easily. Julian, you're scaring me. I don't know anything about your business. I just want our baby to be healthy. Her apparent fragility and ignorance were her shield. The more he descended into a paranoid hell of his own making, the more invisible she became to him as a threat. Meanwhile, the real work was accelerating. With Julian's capital tied up and his primary acquisition strategy in ruins, the Odysseus Trust moved from defense to offense. Chen's team had discovered Julian's Plan B for the Helios project. Buried deep within the Citadel server was a file labeled Project Chimera. It was a contingency plan to fund the takeover using capital siphoned from the pension fund of a manufacturing company Croft Consolidated had acquired 3 years prior. It was illegal. A blatant violation of ERISA regulations. And an act of corporate malfeasance so profound it could lead to prison time. This is the kill shot. MS. Vance. Chen told her during one of their nightly calls. But we need unequivocal proof that he, and he alone, authorized this. A digital file can be disavowed. We need his signature on a physical document or a voice recording. Ilara's blood ran cold. This was a new level of risk. He keeps all sensitive documents in the office safe. It's biometric. Only his thumbprint can open it. Then we must find a way to get inside that office. Chen stated simply. The opportunity came in a way Ilara could never have predicted. One afternoon, Julian, increasingly erratic and sleep-deprived, confronted her in the living room. He had a printout in his hand. A log of all incoming calls to the penthouse landline. Who is AV Deliveries? He demanded, stabbing a finger at the entry from 3 weeks ago. They called the day before the German investigation started. Who are they? Ilara's heart stopped. She had been so careful. But she couldn't control the building's call logs. She feigned ignorance. Her mind racing. AV. I don't know. Julian. A flower delivery. Perhaps. I get so many things. I can't remember. Don't lie to me. He roared. His face contorted with rage. He was a cornered animal. Lashing out at shadows. Everything is connected. It's all part of Petrov's plan. In his fury, he swept a lamp off an end table. It crashed to the floor. As he turned, he stumbled over the wreckage, his arm flailing out to break his fall. He cried out in pain, clutching his right wrist. It was bent at an ugly, unnatural angle. He had broken it. Chaos erupted. His assistant was called. An orthopedic specialist summoned for an emergency house call. In the frantic shuffle, as Julian was sedated for the pain and his arm was set in a heavy cast, Ilara saw her chance. His right arm. His dominant arm. His key to the biometric safe. Was incapacitated. That night, as Julian slept a deep, drugged sleep in their bed, his arm propped up on a pillow, Ilara slipped into his office. The room was dark. The city lights painting stripes across the floor. She approached the safe, which was hidden behind a minimalist painting. She knew she couldn't open it. But she didn't need to. Chen had anticipated this possibility. He had instructed her on what to look for, a digital recorder. No bigger than a pen. That Julian used to dictate memos. He was too vain to be seen wearing his reading glasses to type everything. Ilara found it on his desk, right next to his blotter. She turned it on and scrolled through the audio files. They were mostly mundane, memo to legal. Note to self, call the Hamptons landscaper. And then she found it. A file created 2 weeks ago. The title was simply, Chimera Contingency. She put the recorder to her ear. Her hand trembling as she pressed play. Julian's voice filled the silence. Crisp and clear. Note to file. Project Chimera. In the event of a failure of the primary financing tranche for the Helios acquisition, I am authorizing the leveraging of surplus assets from the Midwest Manufacturing Pension Fund, as detailed in the attached prospectus. This is a temporary bridge loan, to be repaid post-acquisition. The risk is minimal. The reward is total. This authorization is mine and mine alone. End note. It was everything. The smoking gun. A confession in his own voice. She connected the recorder to the secure laptop using a tiny cable. The file transferred in seconds. She sent it immediately to Chen. Then she wiped the connection log from the laptop, placed the recorder exactly where she had found it, and slipped out of the office, leaving no trace. Back in the guest bathroom, she received a one-word message from Chen on the encrypted chat, checkmate. A wave of relief and terror washed over her. The final piece was in place. She walked to the window of the guest room and looked out at the city aglow. It was no longer a glittering prison. It was a kingdom about to fall. The cracks in the facade were about to become a catastrophic collapse. And she was the one holding the detonator. The end came not with a bang, but with the quiet, devastating efficiency of a perfectly executed plan. It was a Wednesday morning. Exactly 1 month after her cards had been declined. Julian, his arm in a black sling and his mood fouler than ever, was on the phone with his bankers, trying to salvage the Helios deal through sheer force of will. He was trying to arrange a new, punishingly expensive line of credit from a hedge fund in Connecticut. A move of pure desperation. Ilara sat in the living room, ostensibly reading a book on child development. On her lap, hidden beneath the book, was the secure satellite phone displaying a live, encrypted feed from Chen. The message on the screen read, Phase 1 initiated. 9:30 a.m. EST. Stand by. At precisely 9:30 a.m. An email was sent from an untraceable, encrypted server in Estonia to a select group of people. The recipients included the lead enforcement attorney at the Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, the head of the Department of Labor's Pension Oversight Division, and, most devastatingly, a Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative journalist at the Wall Street Journal named David Chenier, known for his relentless exposés of corporate fraud. The email was brief and anonymous. It contained a single, password-protected attachment. The password was Legacy. Inside the attachment was the complete, damning story of Project Chimera. There were the internal memos from the Citadel server, the secret prospectuses, the falsified actuarial reports, and the labyrinthine charts showing the planned diversion of pension funds. And at the heart of it all was the audio file, Julian Croft, in his own voice, authorizing the illegal act. Ilara watched Julian through the open doorway of the living room. She saw the exact moment the world shifted. His phone buzzed with an incoming call. He looked at the caller ID and his face tightened. It was his chief legal counsel. What is it? Robert? He snapped. A long pause. What do you mean? What have I done? The journal? What about the journal? His face went from pale to ghostly white. He stumbled over to the bank of monitors in his office, his good hand flying across the keyboard. He brought up the Wall Street Journal's website. The headline was just being pushed to the front page. Croft Consolidated implicated in pension raid scheme. SEC launches urgent probe. Leaked audio reveals billionaire Julian Croft's voice. No. He whispered. It was a strangled, broken sound. No. 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 His phone began to ring incessantly. Then his other lines. A cacophony of incoming calls. Each one another nail in his coffin. The hedge fund in Connecticut. His terrified board members. His PR team. Chen's feed on Ilara's phone updated, Phase 2 initiated. Trading halt requested. On the financial news network playing silently on a nearby television. A red banner flashed across the bottom of the screen, Trading in Croft Consolidated, CFCN, halted pending news. The fortress had been breached. The ghost in the machine had revealed itself. Julian was a man unraveling in real time. He swept a monitor off his desk, sending it crashing to the floor. He kicked his chair over. He was roaring. A primal scream of disbelief and fury. Petrov. It was Petrov. That son of a bitch. He still didn't see it. His colossal ego was his final blind spot. He was so busy looking for an enemy on his own level that he never thought to look down. Ilara calmly placed her book and the phone on the couch, stood up, and walked to the threshold of his office. He looked up at her, his eyes wild and bloodshot, searching for something, an ally, an anchor. Ilara. He gasped. They're destroying me. Everything. It's all gone. She looked at him. Her expression not of pity, but of cold, clear judgment. She felt nothing. The fear, the love, the subservient side had all been burned away, leaving only the hard, clean truth of their relationship. Yes, she said, her voice even. They are. Something in her tone, in her stillness, finally pierced his paranoid fog. A new, dawning horror crept into his eyes. He looked at her, truly looked at her for the first time in years. He saw not the docile wife but a stranger. A woman with secrets. The call. He whispered, his mind finally making the connection. The call log. AV deliveries. He pieced it together. The letters clicking into place. A. V. Arthur Vance. Ilara didn't need to confirm it. Her silence was his answer. He stared at her. His mouth agape. The scale of the deception was too vast for him to comprehend. The obedient wife. The beautiful accessory. The vessel for his legacy. She was the architect of his apocalypse. You. He breathed. The word full of utter disbelief. It was you. All of it. How? Ilara walked over to his desk. To the one spot he had cleared in his rage. She placed a single sheet of paper upon the polished wood. It was the only piece of physical evidence she had allowed herself. It was a statement she had requested from Chen that morning. A statement for the Odysseus Trust. It showed no account numbers. No incriminating details. It just showed the trust's name. Her name as the sole beneficiary. And its current market value a staggering figure that was nearly double what Julian's empire had been worth at its peak. And at the bottom, there was a single-line item under the heading, Recent Strategic Allocations, Short Position, Croft Consolidated, CFCN. Julian's eyes scanned the paper. He saw the name. He saw the valuation. And he saw the final, brutal checkmate. She hadn't just exposed him. She had bet against him. She had profited from his downfall. The Odysseus Trust had shorted his company into oblivion. And in doing so, its own value had skyrocketed. He looked from the paper to her face. The man who controlled everything had controlled nothing. The master of the universe had been undone by a ghost from the past and a woman he had fatally underestimated. He didn't shout. He didn't rage. All the fight went out of him, replaced by a hollow, echoing emptiness. He slowly sank into his remaining chair. A ruined king on a broken throne. Just then, the penthouse doorbell rang a loud, insistent, official sound. Ilara walked past Julian without another glance. She went to the front door and opened it. 2 men and 1 woman in dark, conservative suits stood in the hallway. The man in the middle held up his credentials. SEC enforcement. He said grimly. We have a warrant to seize all documents and electronic devices belonging to Julian Croft. Behind them, the elevator doors opened and 2 uniformed NYPD officers stepped out. Ilara stepped aside, holding the door open for them. He's in his office, she said calmly. I believe you'll find everything you need. She walked away, not looking back as they swarmed into her home, into Julian's life. She went to her bedroom and picked up a single packed suitcase that had been waiting in her closet. It contained a few changes of clothes, the secure laptop, and the leather folio her grandfather had given her. It was all she needed. As she walked to the service elevator, she could hear the lead agent reading Julian his rights. His voice was a monotone drone. The final, dreary rights for a fallen empire. The sound faded as the elevator doors closed, carrying her down and away out of the gilded cage and into the rest of her life. 1 year later, the air in the old stone house didn't smell of white tea and lilies. It smelled of lavender from the fields outside, of damp earth after a rain shower, and of the sweet wax of old, polished wood. The house, a beautifully restored 18th century mosque nestled in the hills of Provence, France, was the antithesis of the Fifth Avenue penthouse. It was solid, rooted, and quiet. Ilara sat on a worn linen sofa, a book lying open in her lap. Sunlight streamed through the French doors, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. The only sound was the gentle cooing of her son, sleeping peacefully in a simple wooden bassinet beside her. She had named him Arthur. He was a beautiful, healthy baby with her dark hair and, she was certain, her grandfather's calm, observant blue eyes. He was not a legacy or an heir to a financial dynasty. He was simply her son. And her love for him was a fierce, quiet, and boundless thing. The past year had been one of careful, deliberate reconstruction, guided by Alastair Chen. She had vanished from the New York social scene as completely as a ship slipping over the horizon. The Odysseus Trust had performed its final act on her behalf. It had anonymously bought out the remnants of Croft Consolidated for pennies on the dollar during the bankruptcy proceedings. The purchase included several of the company's legitimate assets. including the now liberated Solara Innovations. Ilara, as the trust's beneficiary, had become the silent majority owner of a burgeoning clean energy company. She had installed a new, ethical board of directors led by the brilliant female engineer who had originally founded Solara before Julian's predatory attack. The company was thriving, this time with a mission that went beyond shareholder value. She didn't live the life of a billionaire. The ostentatious wealth Julian had craved now felt vulgar to her. She had sold the penthouse, the Hamptons estate, the diamonds, the cars, the proceeds, along with a significant portion of the trust's capital, were funneled into a new entity she had created, the Vance Foundation, dedicated to funding legal aid for women in coercive relationships and investing in female-led startups. Her grandfather's weapon had been transformed into a tool for creation. Of Julian, she heard only sporadic, grim news through Chin. His fall had been absolute. Stripped of his wealth, buried in lawsuits from shareholders and the government. He was a pariah. The SEC had barred him from the securities industry for life. The Department of Labor's case regarding the pension fund was proceeding to a criminal trial, and a conviction seemed certain. His powerful friends had abandoned him instantly. His name, once a synonym for success, was now a cautionary tale whispered on Wall Street. One afternoon, Chen forwarded her an article from a New York tabloid. It featured a recent, grainy photograph of Julian. He was leaving a courthouse. No longer in his bespoke suits but in an ill-fitting, off-the-rack one. He looked haggard, gaunt, and a decade older. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a haunted look in his eyes. The headline was cruel and concise: Broken, the fall of Julian Croft. Ilara looked at the photo for a long moment. Felt a flicker of something, not pity, but a profound sadness for the man he could have been, and then deleted the message. He was a chapter she had finished reading. Her life was now defined by small, tangible joys: the weight of Arthur in her arms, the taste of fresh bread from the village boulangerie, a walk through the lavender fields as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. She was not the imprisoned Mrs. Croft or even the vengeful Ilara Vance. She was just Ilara, a mother, a quiet businesswoman, a woman who had fought her way out of the dark and into the light. She looked down at her sleeping son. She would tell him the story one day, not the story of revenge, but the story of resilience. She would tell him about his great-grandfather, Arthur Vance, a man who understood that true strength was not about controlling others but about ensuring the freedom of those you love. She would teach him that a legacy isn't built with steel and glass and leveraged buyouts, but with integrity, courage, and purpose. A warm breeze drifted in through the open doors, carrying the scent of a future that was entirely her own. She had been trapped, penniless, and pregnant. Now she was free, powerful, and a mother. Julian Croft had tried to destroy her, but in doing so, he had inadvertently forged her into the woman she was always meant to become. And that, she knew, was the greatest victory of all. Ilara's story is a chilling reminder that the most opulent cages are still cages. It's a story of how devastatingly a powerful man can underestimate a woman, and how intelligence and hidden strength can become the ultimate weapons. It isn't just about revenge. It's about reclaiming a narrative, securing a future, and turning the tools of oppression into instruments of liberation. The battle between new money arrogance and old money cunning played out not on a trading floor, but in the heart of a marriage, with a child's future hanging in the balance. If you found this story of resilience and strategic genius as compelling as we did, please hit that like button to show your support. Share it with someone who loves a story of epic karma. And make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next deep dive into real-life drama. What part of Alara's plan impressed you the most? Let us know in the comments below.